Brat built its entire identity on wealth, so when the court documents come out and the numbers are embarrassing, it lands hard. This video covers female rappers who charted, sold millions, and still ended up in bankruptcy court, federal prison, or foreclosure. From Lauryn Hill sentenced to federal prison to Lil Kim, days away from losing her mansion.
According to reports, the Queen Bee is in danger of losing her nest, and she may need some cash from her hive.
TLC moving 14 million albums and walking away with almost nothing.
We are broke as broke can be.
And we're saving the most infuriating case for last, because it didn't happen in the 90s, it happened in 2026. These are the 9 female rappers that went insanely broke. Lauryn Hill. Lauryn Hill is the hardest case on this list to watch because the distance between what she represented and what the court documents say is genuinely difficult to reconcile. This is the woman who made The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, one of the most critically untouchable albums in the history of rap and R&B. And in 2013, she was standing in a federal courtroom while a judge handed down a prison sentence for tax evasion. The Department of Justice laid out the specifics. Hill earned approximately $1.8 million between 2005 and 2007 from music and film and failed to file federal tax returns on any of it. She pleaded guilty to 3 misdemeanor counts. The sentence was 3 months in prison, 3 months of home confinement, 9 months of supervised release, and a $60,000 fine. Reuters reported that by the time of sentencing, her total tax obligation had grown to almost $1 million, and that she had paid it. What makes this more than a celebrity didn't pay taxes story is what Hill said in court. Reuters quoted her arguing that after stepping away from the spotlight, she had become vulnerable, that she was being perceived as a cash cow, not a person. She also said her intention had always been to get the situation rectified. Those are not the words of someone who got careless with paperwork. That is someone describing a collapse that started long before the IRS got involved, a withdrawal from an industry that had consumed her, followed by years of irregular income, followed by a tax exposure that compounded quietly until it became a federal case. The media version of this story usually focuses on the eccentricity angle, the late concert, the public statements, the persona. The court record tells a different story. One of the most decorated artists in the genre's history, financially cornered, paying almost $1 million in back taxes, while her legacy sat untouched and her bank account did not reflect any of it. The gap between Lauryn Hill, the icon, and Lauryn Hill, the federal defendant, is one of the starkest contradictions this list has to offer. Lil Kim. Lil Kim's case has a detail that makes it cinematically perfect for this kind of video. She filed for bankruptcy with days to spare before her mansion went to auction. Not weeks, days. The Alpine, New Jersey property had been in foreclosure proceedings since 2010. By spring 2018, it had reached the point of scheduled auction, one of the wealthiest zip codes in the country, and her house was about to be sold out from under her. She filed Chapter 13 just before that happened. The numbers in the filing are specific. Total liabilities of $4,084,841 against assets of $2,573,300, with roughly $2 million of those assets tied up in the house itself. Her unpaid tax debt alone was listed at $1,845,451. Legal fees added another $186,000 on top of that. Kim was direct about what the filing was actually for. In an affidavit quoted in subsequent reporting, she stated that the case was filed to stay a foreclosure action, with the purpose of giving her time to obtain a loan modification. A separate filing quoted in coverage said she remained committed to saving her home and reorganizing her debt. There is something almost surgical about that, using the architecture of federal bankruptcy law as a last-minute instrument to stop a clock that had been running for 8 years. The income picture makes the trajectory clear. One report noted that her 2017 earnings had dropped below $400,000, a significant number on its own, but not when you are carrying a mansion, nearly $2 million in tax debt, and mounting legal costs in a zip code where the property taxes alone are substantial. The asset looked like wealth. The liabilities behind it told a completely different story. Later reporting indicates Kim stabilized the situation and eventually resolved her tax problems, but the 2018 to 2019 paper trail is not a rumor or an estimate. It is a federal bankruptcy filing with line item numbers, and it shows exactly how an artist can maintain a luxury image while the financial structure underneath it is years into collapse. The mansion was the last visible piece of a picture that had been coming apart long before anyone outside her circle knew about it. The difference between Lauryn Hill and Lil Kim is the mechanism. Hill's collapse ran through the IRS and the federal court system. Kim's ran through real estate and Chapter 13, but the underlying shape is identical. Income that softened, debt that didn't, and a legal system that eventually made the private situation very public. Left Eye Lopes. The math on TLC's situation is genuinely hard to look at, and it gets worse the longer you stare at it. By 1996, the group had moved an estimated 14 million albums. Retail generated roughly $175 million, and according to the Los Angeles Times, TLC had collectively received about $1.2 million of that. Left Eye broke it down herself. Their contract worked out to approximately 20 cents per album, split 3 ways after recoupment. That is roughly 6 or 7 cents each per unit, on one of the best-selling catalogs in 1990s pop music. They filed Chapter 11 while their songs were still on every radio station in the country. The detail that should make any musician physically uncomfortable is the Grammy performance story. Appearing at the Grammys, one of the most visible stages in the music industry, reportedly deepened TLC's debt because the cost of performing had to be recouped from future royalties. They were paying to be famous. Every appearance that looked like a career milestone was quietly being charged back to an account they were already losing. The show went on. The balance sheet got worse. Left Eye's quote from that period is not the kind of thing you say when you are spinning a narrative. She said she hoped TLC would go down in history for being something more than just another famous act that got ripped off. Chili said it felt like being trapped no matter which way you turn. These are not post-career reflections. They are statements made at the peak of the group's commercial run, while the bankruptcy was live and the contract math was sitting in front of everyone. Left Eye's personal legal exposure had already been adding pressure before any of the bankruptcy paperwork was filed. In 1994, she faced charges connected to the fire at Andre Risen's mansion, arson and property damage, later resolved with probation and a fine reported at $10,000. That incident damaged her publicly and introduced legal costs at exactly the moment TLC's contract situation was becoming impossible to ignore. By the time the Chapter 11 filing landed, she was carrying both the group's collective financial disaster and the reputational weight of that 1994 case simultaneously. The reason TLC belongs near the top of this list rather than at the bottom is that their case makes the systemic argument better than any other example here. This was not one artist making bad decisions. This was three women at the absolute center of mainstream music culture, with platinum certifications stacking up faster than they could count them, legally trapped inside a contract structure that redirected the overwhelming majority of the money they generated away from them before they ever saw it. The label held the math, the group held the image. Those are not the same thing, and TLC proved it in federal bankruptcy court, while the rest of the world assumed they were rich. Brat's financial collapse is the most linear cause and effect story on this list. One decision on one night in 2007 created a chain of consequences that took over a decade to fully land, and by the time it was done, she had served prison time, absorbed a $6.4 million civil judgment, and filed bankruptcy with more than $7.7 million in debt against roughly $108,700 in assets. The dominoes did not stop falling for 11 years. The incident was not complicated. At an Atlanta club, she hit a woman named Shayla Stevens, a hostess and former Falcons cheerleader, with a rum bottle. In 2008, Brat pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, 7 years of probation, plus community service and mandatory treatment condition. 3 years in prison is a long time at any stage of a career, at a moment when the music industry was already restructuring around digital. When the window for legacy acts to maintain commercial momentum was narrowing fast, it was close to a full stop. The criminal case alone would have been a significant hit. Then the civil case arrived. In 2014, a Georgia jury awarded Stevens $6.4 million in damages, tied directly to the assault. That number, landing on top of whatever earning capacity Brat had already lost during her prison years, turned a recoverable situation into a structural impossibility. XXL reported in 2018 that she filed bankruptcy, with liabilities exceeding $7.7 million. The assets column read $108,700. Those two numbers next to each other tell the whole story, without needing any additional commentary. The quote XXL pulled from Brat in that period is one of the most honest lines available on this entire topic. She says she has moments where she feels good and wants to get out there, but then something in the back of her mind says she cannot because she has to pay her bills. That is not a quote about reckless spending or bad investments. That is someone describing what it feels like to have a multi-million-dollar legal judgment permanently parked on top of your life, reshaping every decision you make years after the original incident has faded from the headlines. The structure of Brat's story is what makes it useful beyond the shock value of the numbers. Lauryn Hill's collapse ran through the tax system. Lil Kim's ran through real estate. TLC's ran through contract architecture. Brat's ran through the civil justice system. A single violent act that became a criminal sentence, that became a financial judgment, that became a bankruptcy filing. Every step followed logically from the one before it, and there was no point in the chain where the outcome was anything other than worse than what preceded it. That is a very specific kind of broke, not the kind that creeps up on you, but the kind that arrives with a gavel and a dollar amount attached. Foxy Brown. Foxy Brown's money problems did not arrive with a single dramatic event. They arrived the way IRS problems usually do, quietly, incrementally, and then all at once when the filings became public. The agency filed 6 separate liens connected to unpaid taxes covering the years 2003 through 2006. The total across those liens was $641,558, with penalties and interest added on top. Reporting at the time put the real figure closer to $1 million. That number needs context to land properly. Foxy Brown was not a fringe act. She was a major label rapper rapper with legitimate commercial history, a real profile in mainstream hip-hop, and a name that carried genuine cultural weight through the late 90s and into the 2000s. The IRS liens were not filed against someone who had never made money. They were filed against someone whose income had clearly been significant enough to generate that kind of tax exposure, and then irregular enough that the payments stopped. The limitation with Foxy's case compared to others on this list is that the reviewed sources document the tax crisis clearly, but do not provide the same full collapse arc that Kim or Brat have. There is no bankruptcy filing with line item assets and liabilities. There is no sentencing transcript. What exists is a documented, serious IRS enforcement action against a prominent female rapper. 6 lines, nearly $1 million once penalties compounded, covering 4 consecutive tax years. That is not a paperwork error. That is a sustained period during which the financial infrastructure around a working artist completely failed to keep up with her obligation. The Foxy Brown case fits the broader pattern of this video, precisely because it is not as dramatic as the others. Not every version of this story ends in federal court or a bankruptcy auction. Sometimes it ends with a stack of IRS liens and a career that never fully recovered the commercial momentum it had before the legal exposure became public. The image stays intact longer than the finances do, and by the time the gap between them is visible, the damage is already years old. Roxanne Shante. Roxanne Shante's story requires a different frame than every other case on this list because the problem was not that she spent too much or borrowed against assets she could not carry. The problem was that she made history and then watched other people get paid for it. Shante was a formative figure in female rap. Roxanne's Revenge was a foundational record, part of one of the earliest and most influential beef cycles in the genre's history, and a demonstration that a teenage girl from the Queensbridge projects could hold her own in a format that had not made much room for her yet. The record mattered. The money that should have followed it, by her own account, did not. Pitchfork's 2018 profile on her resurgence described how the biopic about her life captured the way she had been cheated out of money and pushed through abuse and hardship, even while Roxanne's Revenge was establishing her as a pioneer. Later interview clips are framed explicitly around her claim that she walked away from music because she never received a royalty check, not a reduced check, not a delayed check, no check. The important editorial note here is that Shante's case is not a bankruptcy story in the legal sense. The reviewed sources do not show a Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 filing, no IRS enforcement action, no civil judgment. What they show is an artist who helped write the blueprint for women in battle rap, and then described her financial outcome in terms of complete non-payment. The mechanism is different from Lauryn Hill's tax case or Lil Kim's foreclosure. The result, an artist who generated real cultural and commercial value and did not retain the money that value produced, is exactly the same. Her story belongs on this list because it represents the earliest version of a problem that runs through almost every other case here. Before the IRS cases, before the bankruptcy filings, before the civil judgments, there was simply the baseline condition of women in rap being paid poorly, or not at all, for work that clearly had market value. Shante got there first and she left the industry because of it, before most of the other artists on this list had even signed their first deal. Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo is the cleanest example on this list of a specific kind of financial outcome that the music industry produces regularly and almost never talks about openly. The artist who becomes genuinely famous without ever becoming genuinely liquid. She came up as Ice Cube's protege on the West Coast, built real credibility in a lane that was not easy for women to occupy in early 90s rap, and developed a profile that extended well beyond her record sales. BT framed her story explicitly around the idea that her fame became larger than her bank account, that the cultural footprint and the financial reality were operating on completely different scales simultaneously. The sourcing on Yo-Yo is more clip-based than court-based, which is worth being transparent about. There is no bankruptcy filing in the reviewed material, no IRS enforcement action, no civil judgment. What exists is a clear public record of an artist whose own framing of her financial situation centers on the gap between visibility and wealth, and a BET segment that made that gap the entire premise of its coverage. That framing is actually more useful for this video than another bankruptcy filing would be, because it names the structural condition rather than just documenting one instance of it. Yo-Yo did not go broke because of one bad contract clause, or one violent incident, or 1 year of unfiled tax returns. She went broke, or more precisely, never got rich, because the system that made her famous was not designed to make her wealthy, and there was no single dramatic moment where that became obvious. It just quietly became her reality. The combination of Roxanne Shante and Yo-Yo in the same section of this video makes a specific argument that the financial exploitation of women in rap was not a 90s anomaly or a product of individual bad decisions. It was consistent. It operated across different eras and different coasts, and it affected artists at multiple levels of fame, from pioneers who never got a royalty check to West Coast acts whose cultural status never translated into the kind of financial security their male counterparts were building at the same time. Jackie O. If the previous cases needed large numbers to make their point, Jackie O's case makes it with small ones, and the small numbers are somehow more brutal than the large ones. All Hip Hop reported in January 2006 that she filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The asset column listed $1,340. The debt column listed $144,225. Her reported monthly income at the time of filing was below $900, coming from shows and appearances. The same filing reportedly dissolved a 5-album recording contract. She was visible enough in rap media to have a contract, a profile, and a name that people recognize, and her total liquid assets at the time of bankruptcy were $1,300. Contrast that makes Jackie O useful in this video is not her fame level. She is clearly not operating at the same commercial scale as Lauryn Hill or Lil Kim. The contrast is between visibility and liquidity. She was famous enough to have a recording contract, famous enough to be covered by hip-hop media, famous enough that her bankruptcy was considered newsworthy, and her total assets when that bankruptcy was filed were less than the cost of a used car. That gap between being known and being solvent is the core argument of this entire video, and Jackie O illustrates it at its most compressed. The other cases on this list involve millions of dollars moving in the wrong direction. Hers involves $1,340, moving nowhere at all. In some ways, that is a sharper demonstration of the problem because it shows that the dynamic did not require superstardom to operate. You did not have to sell 14 million albums to get caught in it. You just had to be a woman in rap with a contract and insufficient leverage, and the math would do the rest. The lack of a wide mainstream press footprint on Jackie O's case is a real limitation, and her section should not be overstated. But as a supporting illustration of how the middle of the market treated women in rap, artists who were famous enough to be exploited, but not famous enough to have the resources to fight back. Her 2006 filing is one of the starkest data points available. Salt-N-Pepa. Every other case on this list happened in the past. The bankruptcy filings are closed, the prison sentences are served, the tax lines are either paid or compounded into someone else's problem. Salt-N-Pepa's story is different because it did not end. It was still being litigated in federal court in 2026, which means the most legendary duo in female rap history spent decades creating one of the most recognizable catalogs in hip-hop, and are still fighting, and as of this year, still losing over whether they ever actually owned any of it. The lawsuit was filed in 2025 against Universal Music Group. Cheryl, Salt, James, and Sandra Peppa Denton alleged that early recordings had been pulled from streaming platforms in retaliation after they moved to assert their rights and sought damages that could exceed $1 million. The underlying claim was about master ownership, specifically whether they had the right to reclaim their recordings through copyright termination. In January 2026, a federal judge dismissed the case. The ruling was direct. James and Denton had failed to prove they ever owned the copyrights in the master recordings in the first place, which meant they had no legal standing to reclaim them through termination. Read that ruling again slowly. Salt-N-Pepa. Push it. Shoot. What a man. One of the most commercially successful and culturally durable catalogs to come out of the entire late 80s and 90s female rap era. And a federal judge ruled in 2026 that they had not demonstrated they ever owned the masters to those recordings. The songs exist, the legacy exists, the streaming numbers exist. The ownership, legally speaking, did not. This is where the framing of the entire video lands. The cases that opened this list, Lauryn Hill's tax prosecution, Lil Kim's foreclosure, TLC's contract math, can all be read, if you want to read them that way, as stories about individual financial mismanagement. The IRS case, the overstretched mortgage, the group that spent too lavishly. That reading is available, even if it is incomplete. Salt-N-Pepa's 2026 court loss makes that reading impossible to sustain as a general explanation. These are two women who did everything the industry asked of them. They built a catalog that has generated revenue for decades. They maintained their legacy, stayed in the culture, and eventually tried to use the legal mechanism that exists specifically to help artists reclaim their work. And a federal judge told them the foundation they thought they were standing on was not theirs. Reuters and AP both covered the dismissal, which means this is not a music industry rumor or a social media grievance. It is a documented federal court outcome from 6 months ago. The most famous female rap duo in history walked into court to claim what their career built and walked out with a dismissal. The Salt-N-Pepa case is the right way to close this video because it reframes everything that came before it. Roxanne Shante never got a royalty check in the 80s. TLC filed Chapter 11 in the 90s while moving millions of units. Brat filed bankruptcy in 2018. Lil Kim used federal law as a last-minute shield against a foreclosure auction. And in 2026, Salt-N-Pepa lost a federal lawsuit over masters they had spent their entire career believing were part of their legacy. The timeline runs from the mid-80s to right now. The mechanism shifts from bad contracts to tax law, to civil judgments, to copyright rulings, and the underlying outcome stays the same across 40 years. Women in rap, generating enormous cultural and commercial value, and the industry finding a way to make sure the balance sheet did not reflect it. That is not a spending problem, that is a structural one. And it has never stopped. The spending narrative is the easy explanation, and it's almost never the complete one. The contracts, the recoupment clauses, the catalog disputes, the tax exposure that compounds during years of irregular income. That's the actual machinery behind every name on this list. Lauryn Hill said she was being treated like a cash cow, not a person. Left Eye said she hoped TLC would be remembered as more than another famous act that got ripped off. Salt-N-Pepa just lost a federal case over masters they thought they owned. Same story, 4 decades, different names. Drop a comment on which case hit the hardest. Subscribe if you want more of this. See you in the next one.